Palm Sunday, chapter 20. Keeping watch over the court, the guard was now staring straight at Amon. Amon quickly looked away and pulled his hand back, his thoughts swirling in a fog of fear. 2 moments more, and he would have been caught stealing from the high priest's scribe. Amon willed himself to slow his breathing and think. He was trying to form a plan, but for each thing he thought of, he could think of 12 reasons it wouldn't work. He was right in the middle of one of these thoughts when suddenly someone slammed into him from behind. Amon was pushed forward and fell so hard to the ground he bashed his right knee onto the marble steps. A moment later, the shock had passed and Amon pulled himself up on all fours. And there, below him, hidden from everyone, was the stack of parchments. Like a flash of lightning, Amon pulled the top sheet off the stack and hid it inside his tunic. Like his hands were helping him now, and a tall, straight man was apologizing for bumping into him. Amon turned to accept the man's apology, but instead he gasped. It was Joseph of Arimathea. "Forgive my clumsiness, young man," Joseph said, but with his face hidden from the guard overhead, he gave Amon a wink. Amon stared for a moment, then shook his head. "No harm done," he said, understanding now what had happened. It was not an accident. They bowed to each other. Then Amon wandered over to the edge of the court. Hidden now under the roof of the portico, Amon pulled out the scrap of parchment and the scribe's list from under his tunic. He stared at both of them for many minutes, comparing the lines of the particular letters to one of the lines on the same of the other parchment. Finally, he knew. At that moment, the sounds of a riot went up from outside of the court of Israel. All the men started pushing their way into the court of women. Amon followed, wanting to know what was going on. The noise outside the temple was so loud that Amon thought the whole city must be in battle. As he passed through the gates of the court of women, Amon felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Benjamin and Tamar close by. "What's going on?" Benjamin asked his older friend. "I do not know, but we will find out." They entered the court of the Gentiles and saw that hundreds of people were rushing to the eastern side, looking over the edge. To the left, Amon saw squads of Roman soldiers rushing from the fortress of Antonia, taking stations around the Temple Mount. Amon led his little group over to the portico, and just above the spot where he and Tamar had first looked across the Kidron Valley so many days before. The 3 friends leaned over the side of the wall. Below was the sight of which none of them had ever seen. Reaching across the Kidron Valley from the Mount of Olives to the Golden Gate of the city was another bridge right below Amon and his friends. The bridge was filled with hundreds of people, all of them waving palm branches and laying their coats across the road. Just in the middle of the bridge, Amon spotted a man riding on a young donkey, being praised and worshipped all by the people. Jesus, she said. "It's Jesus of Nazareth." Amon looked at Tamar in surprise, then swung back to the scene below. All the people, still waving branches and shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna to the King." Others shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David." And above others, he heard a woman scream, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." As Jesus drew closer to the city gates, the cries of the crowd grew louder and louder, and Amon found himself getting caught up in the emotion. "Hosanna," he said. "Hosanna to the King." Then suddenly he realized what he was saying. Stepping back from the wall, he stumbled away, wondering about his own curious behavior. Remembering why he was there in the first place, Amon rushed back to the court of women. Benjamin and Tamar followed, and soon the court began to fill with people again as the spectacle outside the wall passed the gate and into the city. Amon quickly told his friends what had happened before the interruption, and now all 3 began to look for the scribe. They spotted him in the middle of 15 semicircular steps that led up to the court of Israel. He was holding his stack of parchments and standing right next to Caiaphas. The high priest seemed to have gone mad. He was ranting and yelling loud enough for everyone in the court to hear. "This Jesus is a menace," he screamed. "He is disrupting the entire city. He must be stopped," Caiaphas said. Other priests and scribes were gathered around Caiaphas, trying to calm him down, but the high priest continued his tirade. Amon knew he would never get close to the scribe Neri like this. Suddenly, from behind, Amon heard another sound. There was a yell as if someone had just seen something horrible. Then a great commotion. It seemed as if the walls themselves would collapse. In screams, the crowd parted, pulling back to the edges of the court, and Amon saw the man Jesus knocking over tables and smashing chests of money to the ground. Time seemed to go slowly for Amon as he watched this man. He was tall and strong, perhaps the most rugged-looking man Amon had ever seen. Yet in his rage, he had a face so kind and gentle, and instantly Amon knew that he could tell him any secret in the world, as if he would be safe with this man. Sweat flew from the man's brow as he flung the crates of doves and bowls of grain from the tables of the sellers. Amon watched the man only for seconds, but in those seconds felt as if he had lived a year. Now the man was opening his mouth, and Amon could see that he was going to yell something. He held a chest of money over his head, and the first of his words thundered out like the roar of a lion. "It is written that my house shall be called a house of prayer," Jesus roared, "but you are making it a den of thieves." And with that, Jesus smashed the chest of money to the ground, and coins flew everywhere. Amon suddenly snapped out of the trance. People were diving at the money, grabbing what they could. Men who had been in the court of Israel came running down the steps, pushing Caiaphas and the other priests to the side. And Amon saw that Neri was separated from Caiaphas and caught up with the sea of bodies. With Tamar and Benjamin on his heels, Amon fought against the tide of money seekers, grabbed Neri by the tunic, and pulled him under the roof of the portico at the edge of the court. "Well, what do you want?" Neri stammered as the three of the young people surrounded him. A moment later, Neri recognized Amon, and his face went white. Amon was not trying to be cruel, but he knew he had little time. Holding the scrap of parchment in front of Neri's face, "You slipped this note to me in the market," he said. "Now tell me what it means." Neri started trembling in all of his bones, and suddenly turned to let me read that again. Neri started trembling as if all the bones in his body had suddenly turned to water. "I know not what you are speaking of." Amon pulled the other page of the parchment out from under his tunic. "This page you wrote an hour ago," he said, and he held the two parchments together, "and they match exactly. Now please," Amon said, "tell me what this means." Neri looked around nervously, but there was still chaos in the courtyard, and their conversation was going unnoticed. Then Neri seemed to find his skeleton again. He stopped shaking, stood up straight, and said, "Very well. It will be good to share the secret with someone." Amon, Tamar, and Benjamin and the scribe Neri moved farther back into the shadows. Priests' eyes could pry deeply into dark places, they knew, and none of them wanted to get caught sharing this particular secret. "It began many months ago," Neri said, "maybe even more than a year ago. It began," he repeated, "when Caiaphas first started hearing stories about Jesus of Nazareth." Amon stared at the scribe, blinking in disbelief. "All of this is because of some false Messiah?" "False or not, I do not know," Neri said, "but dangerous to Caiaphas indeed. At first he was just amused by the stories. I once heard him say how dull the commoners must be to be fooled by smooth words and trickery. But then reports started coming about Jesus criticizing the priests and the Pharisees, telling the people that the law of Moses had been abolished." "He never said that," Tamar said. Neri shrugged. "Those were the reports we heard, but true or not, they drove Caiaphas mad, especially when they heard how many people were believing in Jesus." Amon shook his head, trying to figure all of this out. "But what does this have to do with my father and the stolen money?" Neri scanned the court of women again, making sure no one was watching. This is in my story. Amon wished that he could tell the story more quickly. The day before Caiaphas gave the dinner and you entertained that week, he said with a nod to Amon, word arrived that Jesus had performed another miracle, and he did it on the Sabbath. Amon gasps, one cannot work on the Sabbath, it's holy, he said in anger, forgetting himself that he had broken the Sabbath just the day before. Neri nodded quickly in agreement. Yes, but Jesus told the Pharisees who were there that the Sabbath was created for man's benefit, not man for the Sabbath. Amon remembered Tamar telling him those words, though he had not paid much attention to her. People were starting to leave the temple courts now, heading for the noon meal and to attend to other business. Amon knew that it wouldn't be long before the high priest wondered where his chief scribe was. So, he said, urging the scribe to continue. So, Neri echoed, Caiaphas decided that Jesus must die. Tamar gasped. Benjamin's eyes shot open. Amon simply nodded. Perhaps that is so. And after a moment he said, if he is a danger to our laws, but I don't understand. Caiaphas knew he would never get a popular prophet like Jesus condemned for insulting a few Pharisees. Neri interrupted. He knew. Neri stopped abruptly and flattened himself against the wall of the portico. Amon followed Neri's gaze and saw Caiaphas, the high priest, standing at the top of the half-circle stairs, searching the faces of the people of the court of women. Amon didn't need to guess who he was looking for. Hurry, Amon whispered. With his eyes still on Caiaphas, Neri matched Amon's whisper and doubled his speed in speech. Caiaphas knew that he would need people to lie about Jesus, and he knew it would cost him money, but the only money he has access to. Once again, Neri stopped mid-sentence. Amon gazed over his shoulder to see Caiaphas descending the stairway, one slow step at a time, searching the courtyard. Instantly, Amon calculated by the time a high priest reached the bottom, he would be no more than 15 feet from them. Tell me quickly, please. Caiaphas only has access to the temple money, Neri said in a rush. He knew it would be blasphemy to use dedicated money for God's purposes for any other purpose. So he was having a man falsely condemned to death. Amon knew the end of the story and finished with a thought. So he needed to get money from the personal treasury of some merchants. Neri pursed his lips with a nod. When Gamaliel told him about you and your family, Caiaphas formed a plan to get your father into the treasury. Amon stared at the scribe for a long moment. Neri, he said at last with much more calm tones, who stole the money from the treasury? Neri finally looked away from the courtyard and right into Amon's eye. Then he said, with just one word that shot through Amon like a spear of a Roman soldier, Caiaphas. And then in a rush, Neri flew to the side of his master and greeted him warmly, leaving the young men and the two children feeling as if they had been struck by lightning. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 7:21. Amon found himself being swept up in the emotion of cheering for Jesus. But emotion is never enough. It cannot sustain a relationship with Jesus for very long. Sometimes it's easy for us to be moved by emotions at a church service, a camp, or even when talking with people. But being emotional about Jesus isn't the same as having a relationship with him. It takes more. It takes a willingness to let him be Lord of your life, which means giving up your selfishness. Would you like to have a relationship with Christ that will last you your whole life long? Very exciting.